Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Jana Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yamuna Thira Vanachari Yamuna Thira Vanachari Jayo Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yamuna Thira Vanachari Yamuna Thira Vanachari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Nitya Gora Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Nitya Gora Hari Bol Nitya Gora Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Nitya Gora Hari Bol Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Nitya Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajacharya Asashata Shishima Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Jaya Nitya Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajacharya Asashata Shishima Bhakti Saranta Saraswati Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai ISKCON Guru Vrinda ki jai, ISKCON BBT founder Acharya, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki jai, Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Caitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Chamakun Radhakun Giri Raj Govardhana ki jai, Vrindavan Mathura Dhamma ki jai, Mayapur Navadvip ki jai, Shri Gangamaya ki jai, Yamuna Maya ki jai, Tulsi Devi ki jai, Bhakti Devi ki jai, Sama Veda Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Transcendental Book Distribution ki jai, Transcendental Prasadam Distribution ki jai, Shri Harinama Sankirtana ki jai, New Govardhana Farm Community ki jai, Cow Protection ki jai. All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Jai Jai Shri Caitanya Jai Nityananda, Jai Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda, Jaya Jaya Shri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda, Jai Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Thank you. Om Agnati Mirandasya Gananjaya Shalakaya Chakshurumritam Yena Tasma Shri Gurave Namaha. Thank you. Hare Krishna, reading from Caitanya Caritamrita. Continuing, chapter 7, text 97. Krishna Name Ananda Sindhu Ashvadana, Brahmananda Thare Age Kato Daka Sama, Krishna Name Ananda Sindhu Ashvadana, Brahmananda Tara Age Kato Deka Sama, Krishna Name Ananda Sindhu Ashvadana, Brahmananda Tara Age Kato Daka Sama, Krishna Name, in the holy name of the Lord, Ye, rich, Ananda, transcendental bliss, Sindhu, ocean, Ashvadana, tasting, Brahmananda, transcendental bliss of impersonal understanding, Tara, its, Age, in front, Kata Udaka, shallow water in the camels, Sama, like. Translation. Compared to the ocean of transcendental bliss, which is tasted by chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, the pleasure derived from impersonal Brahman realization, Brahmananda, is like a shallow water in a canal. Please repeat. Compared to the ocean of transcendental bliss, which is tasted by chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, the pleasure derived from impersonal Brahman realization, Brahmananda, is like the shallow water in a canal. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. In the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu it is stated, Brahmanando bhavet esha chet paradha gunikritaha naiti bhakti sukham bodhe paramanu tulam api. If Brahmananda, the transcendental bliss derived from understanding impersonal Brahman, were multiplied 1,000,000 times, such a quantity of Brahmananda could not compare with even an atomic portion of the pleasure released in pure devotional service. Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu 1:138. I repeat the verse. Compared to the ocean of transcendental bliss, which is tasted by chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, the pleasure derived from impersonal Brahman realization, Brahmananda, is like a shallow water in a canal. Thank you, Srila Prabhupada. Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami Ki Jai. So this is a very short report. It's comparing the level of happiness, the quality of happiness to Brahman realization, impersonal realization, and also we can also compare it to other types of so-called happiness, which we may call happiness, like happiness deriving from sense objects, enjoying from sense objects. So there are different levels of relative happiness, which not necessarily happiness in itself, but perceived that way, either by the illusory energy of Krishna or by realization. So as we're going higher and higher in our realization, we have a better perception what is happiness. So there's a definition of happiness even in our English language. Prabhu, could you explain what is the definition in English language, any of you, of happiness? What is happiness? Before we can even... Yes, it's actually... exactly. It basically means a well-being, contentment, a joyful experience. One has fulfillment, feels that he is satisfied with his life, which is very almost unachievable in the material world, on the material platform, enjoying the senses or deriving so-called happiness out of it. And if there is anything which may be pleasurable, that's very momentary, transitory, temporary. And the consequences are very heavy. We can see individually and collectively there's a karmic consequence. So very high price to pay for a small amount of so-called happiness. It is like the laws of relativity. It's a relative happiness. We may perceive it happiness, but not actually happiness. Therefore the authorities of Vedic teachings, especially the Mahajanas, the great authorities, the 12 Mahajanas, who established the Siddhanta, explain the different levels of happiness. Even within Vaishnava Siddhanta, as we go higher and higher in realizations, there are subtle differences in the quality and also the pleasure and the rasa, the mellows of devotion. We can see even in different stages of realization. Let's say we have the Vaikuntha realm, where we have an own reverence. Naturally, it's a blissful state. It's a very blissful state. But there are subtle differences. You can go higher and higher according to your desire, your intense desire. So some living entities, some jivas are completely satisfied just to reach the Vaikuntha planet and serve the Lord in own reverence in Vaikuntha kingdom. The Lord is receiving all the Vedic hymns and the prayers and the worship and service. So very much of a servitorship mood. But then someone who's very eager to go beyond gets the taste to go beyond even the Vaikuntha platform and go to what we call Goloka Vrindavan, Vraja Bhumi, where Krishna experiences a very intimate, confidential taste and mellow with his devotees. So Krishna is the primary enjoyer, and we are the secondary enjoyer by giving him pleasure. And to come to that platform, we have to, first of all, we have to have a clear understanding what is our objective, which way we're going. Either we're just satisfied with the Vaikuntha realization, the Vaikuntha planets, or go beyond even further to a very high levels of Rajabhumi. And this is when we come to a very exalted platform, and we can see Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu gave us the ultimate. And the six Goswamis naturally confirmed that with the literatures and especially Jiva Goswami, Rupa Goswami, Sanatana Goswami. They had extensive literatures. Jiva Goswami apparently compiled 400,000 verses in the topics of Rajabhumi, particularly Radha and Krishna's pastimes, all the intricacies and confidential dealings, which is obviously requires a very advanced student to receive and perceive, not to speak of experiencing that. But the opportunity is there. Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu gave us the whole formula. That is his greatness. The most kind and most blessing incarnation of Krishna. A great avatar. He's Krishna himself, Sri Krishna Caitanya Mahaprabhu. So he's giving us everything. It is up to the student, it is up to the seekers, how eager they are to achieve the highest realms. And but of course, as long as we attain our spiritual platform, either in a Vaikuntha planet or in Krishna's personal abode, Goloka Vrindavan, it's a perfection, of course. It's a very individual journey also. When we are ready, Krishna and the spiritual master, when the right time reveals the Nitya Swarupa position. We have to earn that position, we have to sincerely endeavor on the path of devotion. At one point, either in this life or in future lives, we don't know, Krishna knows. When we are ready, Krishna reveals that what actually our original position in the spiritual world, in Vaikuntha Dham. So these are the highest levels of happiness, what we can call happiness, from seeing through the eyes of the Goswamis, Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu, the Vedic teachings. And you can see even in the Vedas, because there are different sections, originally was only one Veda, passed down orally, and Vyasadeva separated them into different categories, so the common man can gradually advance. And Vyasadeva finally compiled the Bhagavad Purana, which is the very exalted, the top cream of entire Vedic teachings, the very essential teachings, which gradually again raises our consciousness to the level of love of Godhead, love of Krishna, Krishna Prema. So these are the objectives and the goals of a very sincere student, particularly the devotees of Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu. And you can see the whole pastimes of Sri Caitanya Charitamrita is all about Radha and Krishna, and how the devotees expressing their sincere love and dealings and interaction, serving each other. You can see even in Goloka Vrindavan there are different mellows and experiencing different tastes. Like the Manjaris, they're very, very enthusiastic and very, very blissful just to serve the gopis. Rati Manjari, Rupa Manjari, all the great devotees, all the devotees of Radha and Krishna. And our whole philosophy is like that. More we become the servant of the servant, more pleasure we derive from Krishna consciousness. One time I was reading one essay by Bhaktisaranta Saraswati Maharaj. He said, when one becomes the servant of the servant, even 100 times over, servant of the servant of the servant of the servant, then one may make some advancement. So the humility is very important, that we serve the Vaishnavas, and Krishna is so pleased, giving us more and more pleasure. So in that sense, we always thinking of the pleasure of the Supreme Lord and the devotees, and then, as a secondary enjoyer, we also experiencing actual fulfillment, happiness, what we call happiness, contentment, satisfaction. So if we have that consciousness, then definitely on a path of progressive march, going back to Godhead. But of course, that's a very humble position also. It's not something that we advertise, it's not just something externally exhibit. We're not meant to be pratishta, advertising ourselves. We're satisfied with a very meek, humble position, whatever it is, whatever service we have to do or can do for Krishna. And the idea is to draw Krishna's attention to us and the spiritual master's attention. And we also have to recognize a certain type of etiquette amongst ourselves. We always respect the senior Vaishnavas with humility, eager to hear from them, to fine-tune our realizations, and we make friendship with all the devotees who are kind of equal. And then we're helping the younger devotees, showing them kindness, encouragement, and mercy, basically, and also show mercy on living entities who may have the punya, the readiness or the piety to come forward and inquire about Krishna consciousness. There are many living entities out there who just wait for the right time when the Sankirtan movement reaches their homes, the books getting out there, obviously. So there are many people out there who may, one point in time in their lives, come across and get an opportunity. So the Vaishnava was aiming for the highest level of happiness. And you see this particular sloka and a verse, although very short, but there's so many ways to understand this. Obviously, it's a comparing to the happiness derived from pure devotional service, real devotional service, and compared to the impersonal Brahman realization. The Brahman realization is just like a very small amount, like a drop, compared to the ocean of happiness. Actually, in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, there is also a verse where comparing the happiness derived from impersonal Brahman is like the size of a calf footprint. It's just only very small compared to the ocean, unlimited ananda and happiness from pure loving devotional service. Not to speak of having those exalted realizations and experiences, what a Mahabhagavata or an Uttamadhikari experiences. It's a very internal happiness. This is the real happiness we're seeking, that satisfaction. And of course there's a lower grades of so-called happiness. Most people have kind of basic understanding what happiness is. They feel, when they feel peace, safety, so-called security, pleasures, well-being, contentment. But these are all very temporary experiences. And this is the danger of the material world, because it bewilders us. This is why we are here, basically. We are here to kind of independently seek the ultimate happiness. Therefore, the living entity is actually called Anandamayo, which pleasure seekers, happiness seekers. We can't ignore that. And often we realize that consciously, or just knowingly or unknowingly, we're seeking that ultimate happiness. But in the material world, that's not possible. We have restrictions, we have limitations in every level, you can see. Look at what's happening out there, as we know. People have plans for happiness, but now even that is restricted. They can't even endeavor for happiness anymore, not to speak of ever getting happiness. They can never get happiness in the material world. But of course they have according to their understanding and their perception, sense perception, they may think, they may believe that they know what happiness is. So they have a very relative understanding. But according to the Shastras, seeing through the eyes of the Shastras and authorities, Mahajanas, the great authorities, who actually established the Siddhanta for us very clearly, and make our goals very clear. What is the goal of a Vaishnava? What we're supposed to do here? What we're supposed to attain? So the Mahajanas make it very clear that the ultimate goal of life is to develop our love for God, our original love and devotion, sentiments, those fine sentiments and devotion. And you can see in the material world, people have kind of seeking that, obviously through love, friendship, society, all these external manifestation. They're searching for something that they don't know how to find, but they feel that there's an urge of seeking that pleasure, happiness. But that can be only attained really through great fortune. And this is when the acharyas are giving us the opportunity, the blessings. So we should be grateful that we have this opportunity, whether we are on that platform or not, but we are on the path, and remain a humble servant of the Vaishnavas. And then our chanting, the quality of our chanting also improves. Like I can see Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu make it very clear, Trinadapi Sunichena. One should chant the holy name of the Lord in a humble state of mind. See? We should be ready to offer our respect to everyone, really. All sentient beings. Even the word, English word, servant, if you analyze it, the root is serve an ant. We're ready to serve an ant. We should be so humble and so respectful, at least within ourselves. Of course, we deal with all kinds of people. We don't always express that respect, but we respect. Krishna is in their heart, and the jiva. So we respect, naturally. And of course, when the jiva manifesting some qualities, devotional qualities, some adhikari or advancement, then we naturally respond accordingly, respect again. And at some point we are ready to serve a Vaishnava. Several times in his lectures that when we see a Vaishnava, a real Vaishnava, especially accomplished Vaishnava, the first thing should come into our minds, how can I serve this person? How can I serve this Vaishnava? So we are servants of the Vaishnavas. And this is already touching that happiness we're discussing. So if you really want to be satisfied and content in our humble sadhana practice, then we serve the Vaishnavas. And how we serve the Vaishnavas, this is when we get guidance, of course. We got Shiksha Gurus, we have Diksha Gurus. So we take a bit more clarity or instructions. Okay, you can serve Krishna this way or that way. And the spiritual master can recognize and see the psychophysiological makeup of an individual. They can see, well, you are more suited for this particular service or that or whatever. So it's an individual thing. The idea is to somehow or other engage ourselves, our minds and senses in the service of the Lord. And that gives us that sense of satisfaction and happiness. And naturally we're getting some happiness and pleasure just being in the association of devotees, although we may not be very realized or advanced in many levels. But somehow or other, by the mercy of the spiritual master and the holy name, we get that. So we can push on. Krishna giving us that taste, a bit of nectar here and there. And more sincere we are, more blissful we are actually. You can see sincerity has an external manifestation also. The first thing we try to do is we try to please the devotees, try to do services, understand the instructions of the spiritual master, because they can understand where we're at. So naturally something that we have to kind of work with, because we cannot imitate higher levels. We can only just somehow or other satisfy the desires and instructions of the spiritual master. And that way we remain in that humble service mood, service attitude, which is crucial to actually have even just a sense or feeling of happiness. If we practice devotion service in an egoistic way, Krishna is very kind, of course, he's giving us a chance, and devotion service is more like a journey of purification. We all go through different stages of realizations. Sometimes we make mistakes. Krishna is very kind, forgiving. And he himself says in the Bhagavad Gita, even if one commits a very noble, like a terrible act, falls down from the principles of devotion service. But if he remains on the path of devotion service, he's still considered saintly. So Krishna is so kind and compassionate that he's not rejecting us because we're not following always up to standard. But we should not compromise. We should keep going on. And this gives us the longevity of our devotion service, not a short-term experience, but a long-term experience. And we can hope that by the grace of the Vaishnavas and the spiritual master, we also somehow or other we come to higher levels of realization. On the other hand, the Brahmavadis, they obviously their state of consciousness deluded, because they only have that understanding that this is the ultimate. It's naturally it's some kind of pleasure there, because they're kind of relieved from, especially one attains the Brahma Jyoti state, when he actually gets mukti, so-called mukti. He feels relief from the bodily conception of life and the sufferings of the material world, but still not the same, because there's no personal interaction with the most loving friend, Krishna. I mean, anything enjoyable in this world always comes down to interacting with each other in a loving way. Friends, there's always happiness in that. We are very social, we are always interacting. Very difficult to find happiness by yourself. See, it's not even possible. We have to always deal with each other, not to speak of deriving happiness from serving Krishna. So the Brahmavadis, they don't have that personal relationship. Therefore, their happiness surely better than the ordinary sense enjoyers in the material world, which are still in the bodily conception and the bodily platform, limitations of the material world and the karma and all that involved. But it's not it's a very temporary position also. It is still considered fallen, by the way, see, because we're not in existence in the Brahma Jyoti is still not our original position, not our Nitya Swarupa. So it's obviously more subtle and more elevated position, more goodness. So there are students of Brahmavadi school who take it very sincerely, but their level of realization is only that. But the Vaishnava school takes it further. And they take it to a very personal relationship with Krishna. The Mayavada school takes it to an offensive platform, unfortunately. The Brahmavadis, they can have a chance to progress, maybe next life or whatever, whenever they are ready. But the Mayavada, they commit offenses, because their whole understanding is decline Krishna. Krishna is a Mayavada. So Krishna is not Maya, of course, but they deny Krishna's personality, Vigraha, as Maya. So and then they're aiming to be Narayan. So they're aiming to imitate something that they can never be. They can never be the Mahapurusha. They can never be the supreme complete whole Krishna. There can never be. This is a complete delusion. This is the most dangerous position actually. The last snare of illusion, last snare of Maya. When one is so bewildered by this concept of becoming Narayan and denying the original divine personality Krishna, that he is classified as Mayavadi. So, interestingly, this whole chapter, Prakashanda Saraswati, who was obviously a very learned scholar, Mayavada scholar, and these Mayavadi sannyasis were greatly fortunate to have Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu present. Obviously, they're not ordinary, they had some punyas, so they're able to, by the potency of Mahaprabhu, they could somehow or other perceive that there is actually a higher reality, a transcendental reality of the Bhagavan realization, supreme realization, which leads us to the real happiness. We talked about happiness here, comparing happiness, what are the happiness. And in the material world, we can see just right in front of us, wherever we go, people seeking happiness on the material, especially sense objects, in so many ways, depending on the gunas, the modes of nature, they're seeking the so-called happiness, which are very conditional, very conditional. And like I said earlier, a very high price to pay. And there's also punishment, because we're dealing with the laws of nature, the laws of Krishna, Prakriti. So, and if you're trying to enjoy bypassing Krishna and his supreme laws, then naturally there will be consequences. So, so that's not the way to receive happiness. But because they don't have the access or fortune to understand that there is a supreme receiver of service, supreme receiver of love, the supreme enjoyer, Mahapurusha, Purusha. Therefore, they remain in that delusion, the thinking that they can be happy this way, that way. One thing I've realized when I used to distribute, especially Srimad Bhagavatam, when I was up in Cairns, we used to have these home programs, and I used to present at the end of the kirtan. I had a short talk about the holy name and the Bhagavatam. And there were so many people coming, not just sometimes Indian families, sometimes Western. We didn't have a preaching center, so we did a bit of home programs. We organized visiting people. And I've realized more convinced we are about the merits of Krishna consciousness than they are about material life or material path, then we have an impact on them. If we are not convinced, or if we're still having a bit of doubts here and there, then they can sense that. They're not, oh well. But if we are very convinced, thoroughly convinced, not to speak of have the purity, then we can have an impact on their heart. Yes, Krishna is the supreme, the ultimate, total, supreme personality of Godhead. And you can see, if you read the Sri's Upanishad, there's a very clear, systematic description. Krishna's potencies. He's a complete whole. He's a supreme personality of Godhead. So it is very important that as students of Vaishnava school and humble grand disciples of His Divine Grace, Sri Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, and the Vaishnavas, servants of the Vaishnavas, that we convince ourselves by hearing, very important, hearing the Vaishnava teachings. There's so many nice devotees who can explain, and we all progress together. And when we have that conviction, then we can have an impact on others. We can have convincing power. We can somehow or other convince them to take the book. And you can see some very advanced devotees within our movement, like Vaisheshekha Prabhu, Vijay Prabhu, and so many beautiful devotees who distributed books. excellent preachers, devotees who engage in preaching activities, Harinamas and book distribution. They all very, very effective devotees. There's so much conviction. Therefore, they can sell so many books. It is not something that we have to kind of intellectualize. It's something that within our conviction, our realization, and people tend to sense it. Wow, this person is very convinced. Let me see what is this book about. So, because like this verse also explains very clearly that living entities are ultimately they're not happy in the material world, although they're seeking happiness in so many ways. So they're always open to it, more or less. Depends on the level of karma and guna karma, whatever. Obviously, people are very much covered with tamaguna. They can't see beyond that. It is very much in a simple kind of materialistic or superficial way of saying this. They don't understand. But people a bit more in the sattva guna or somehow or other seeking solutions to their problems because they're suffering. Some people seeking wealth. Rarely some seek absolute truth, knowledge. There are some sattvic persons who somehow or other they're searching for that. So most people are suffering, misdirected, misguided. But when they hear someone who's got conviction, there's a ray of hope. Wow, this person knows. I feel something with him. Let me see these books. And this is the ultimate key for selling Prabhupada's books, our conviction. We're very convinced, then we can touch their heart. We can bypass the ego and intellect in touching their heart. And that's how Srila Prabhupada preached. You can see, listen to his classes, lectures, so many audio recordings. Prabhupada knew how to deal even with the most so-called intellectuals, academics, scientists. And some or other reach their heart, bypassing the so-called intellectual kind of exercise and ego and pratishta and this and that, professor. But actually Prabhupada see, well, this is a pure jiva, atma, a pure soul here, suffering in ignorance. But somehow or other has a great fortune to meet Srila Prabhupada. So Prabhupada obviously met and blessed them somehow or other. They have a great punya, they continue, maybe in this life or next life, whenever they are ready. So this potency is there, potency. And so this is how I can explain this short purport, comparing different levels of happiness. Material happiness can be analyzed even more in many, many examples. There's so many examples. We can just see the material world ourselves, that people are not happy. And although we wish them to be happy, but they also have to be ready to receive. Otherwise they may have to go through their experiences and purification and journey. At the next life, whenever they are ready, Krishna will somehow or other also brings them. So, thank you. Any questions? Yeah.
Hare Krishna. This is a very famous verse spoken by Lord Caitanya.
Yes, thank you.
And he speaks about the comparison of
Yeah.
enjoyment.
Yeah.
But couldn't someone ask, well, enjoyment is just subjective.
Yeah.
Someone likes this and the other one likes that. So as far as each one's enjoyment, they may feel ecstasy here and the other one feels the same.
Yeah.
So why these statements that one is higher than the other? Because isn't it just subjective?
Yeah.
Why Lord Caitanya is saying that this one is much higher than
You see, obviously, very nice question. Thank you, Maharaj. Obviously, what I can say from my own realization is that we naturally accept the words of the authority. Obviously, they can see, they know exactly what is good for us. Just like if I want to know something about my health, and at some point I have to approach a physician. And the physician has the knowledge, the authority. Okay, well, this is your biological or physiological challenge. So similarly, Krishna knows exactly what the living entities need. So there's a definition. In a material platform, it's relative. One man's food can be poison for another. So the living entities perceive happiness this way, that way. The hog enjoys, stool. The human beings enjoy this way, that way. It's all relative. Obviously, there's some pleasure in it, but that's like he says in the purport here, just like the Brahman realization, not even a drop compared to the real happiness. And how we can understand which is better or not at this stage on our level is to accept the words of the authority. Naturally, we're not experiencing that, so our happiness is so-called subjective because we very much conditioned by the sense objects. And even our minds, it's all about what gives me pleasure. And it's quite individual, even individually. So we all have our perception, how can I be happy this way, that way. But the authorities say that actually we cannot be. And there are many, many beautiful slokas actually on this, just complementing what you said also.
While you're doing that, I can just offer another aspect.
Yeah.
Is that actually,
Yeah.
So there are many statements, but ultimately, just like Prabhupada gives the example of the pig. The pig likes to eat stool. That's his enjoyment. And you offer the pig sweet right now, prefer the stool. So even though others think, that's crazy, the pig, sweet rice is much better than stool. But for the pig, so all these statements are meant just to convince us to try it.
Yeah, that's right.
To try it.
Try.
Because, as George Harrison famously said in the introduction of the Krishna, the proof, the pudding, is in the eating.
Thank you.
So, intellectually, we convince ourselves, and mentally we convince ourselves to do this and do that, and we've got our subjective experiences and relativities and so on. But appealing to our intelligence, and of course this is a statement by Lord Caitanya, that we have to take into consideration who he is. So these statements are all, just like you said, the statements of the acharyas, just meant, Prabhupada one time said Bhagavad Gita. He said actually there's only need for one verse in Bhagavad Gita. Don't worry about anything else. And he said that all the other verses are there just to convince us to do it.
Yeah, that's right.
So the same thing here. All these different statements, one same. So we can say that, what Caitanya is saying this, of course the Brahmanis, they say the same thing. No, our Brahman is the highest enjoyment. So therefore, appealing to the intelligence through all these statements, he can become a little convinced, well, let at least try that.
It's all.
Let me at least try the chanting,
and
then we ourselves can experience. So that's another understanding.
Thank you very much. It's basically all this complementing the original idea, which is, like Maharaj said, trying that, because we may not experience ourselves that higher realms of enjoyment and happiness in Krishna consciousness, but there's pleasure, there's some taste there, obviously. So, but we have faith, which are very important, obviously, and our faith is based on really by hearing and of course studying and trying to understand these things rationally. So at least we are sincere enough to try. And we want to we will request others to try also by bringing all these examples, because they only think, because they are rational, we call rational, they're very subjective. The whole science is like that. It's all experimental, theoretical. You can see most of the scientific claims are only theories. And they're very subjective and trying to understand through their senses. When someone comes in and says there's something beyond that, it's very difficult for them to comprehend. Unless they have some kind of punya already, when they are a bit willing to try. And a lot of them don't have the punya yet. They don't have the great fortune to even open a page or hear about something or completely deny it. We call it denial. But there are a lot of these stories, like we said, complementing the ultimate, that we have to surrender to Krishna, we have to give a go in ourselves. And when we give a go, we surrender, we're giving ourselves to Krishna, then this is when we get a taste. And of course hearing constantly, very important, hearing, shravanam, kirtanam, smaranam, remembering, chanting, very important aspects, the most important aspects of our sadhana practice. Because that way we get the taste, we become convinced, and this is when we can have some or other, like I said earlier, have an impact on people, because they can't understand the philosophy. But we're trying to facilitate, trying to make them understand some things at least, so they can try. And when they try, then Krishna will help them more, obviously. Some we don't know exactly, but Krishna helps them, gives them clarity, gives them a bit more perception. Otherwise, the so-called happiness, feelings, one man's food can be poison for another, it's all relative. So from our perspective, oh wow, pig is enjoying this way, that way, very, horrifying. So we discriminate. It's a kind of a intellectual thing, because and that's what the Brahmavadis, they intellectualize. They're very jnani sort of fellows. They intellectualize on this, and they're not convinced that there's anything higher. So they level on that. So they think this is the highest. But to convince them, we have to bring them so many examples, so they can at least, let me try, let me see, let me hear from the right person, and they may get the mercy also. It's something that we can only just try. And thank you. Any more questions? Thank you, Maharaj. Hare. Shri Caitanya Caritamrita ki jai, Shri Prabhupada ki jai.